Hello, economic students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 15, Section 1, Macroeconomic Equilibrium. And we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some things from the past. We're going to talk about supply and demand, as crazy as that might seem. We're going to talk about it from a macroeconomic point of view. So, what tools do we use to discover where the balance is in macroeconomics? And it's like we do in microeconomics, we use supply and demand. We use those curves to kind of determine where's the equilibrium. The big thing to remember is that aggregate supply and aggregate demand is basically the demand of the entire market. Okay, when we look at from supply and demand from a microeconomic point of view, we're looking at one um, supplier or one firm within a market. And now we're looking at the entire market at one time. So that's really kind of the big difference between those two. But otherwise, there's a lot of similarities when we talk about how the curve moves and such. So aggregate supply is the total value of goods and services that all firms would produce within a specific period of time at various price levels. So rather than just one firm, we're looking at all the firms. So if we look at our supply curve, this would be the red. As you can see here, we have our aggregate supply. This is our original supply curve. What we see is that supply increases, okay, and as a result, it kind of moves to the right. Okay, as you can see that demand for the most part, as you can see, kind of changes, as far as where demand curve intersects, and hence we're going to have some different equilibriums as far as how that is concerned. Okay, so what is aggregate supply curve? That shows the amount of real GDP produced at various price levels. Okay, what factors could decrease the aggregate supply? Factors that could increase the cost of production. So if labor goes up, or if maybe one of the inputs, for the product goes up, that might change the amount of supply that's going to be out there. Higher interest rates could be part of that. Lower labor productivity. So as kind of like as a regular microeconomic supply curve would move. If it increases, it's going to move to the right. If it decreases, it's going to move a little bit to the left. Okay. And as it increases, typically we look at price coming down. If it decreases, that probably means that the price that's out there on the supply is probably going to have to go up a little bit because there isn't as much out there. Aggregate demand is the total value of all goods and services demanded at different price levels. So, what is an aggregate demand curve? It's basically a graph curve that shows the amount of total output measured in terms of real GDP that could be purchased at every possible price level. So we have our original demand curve and we have our new aggregate demand curve. This is showing an increase in demand as it moves to the right. If demand would go, basically decrease, it would move to the left. Okay. So that kind of shows you where the equilibrium would be. So as demand increases, so this price, if demand would decrease, price is probably going to decrease as a result of that. All right, moving ahead. What factors could cause aggregate demand to decrease? Could be more savings, meaning like people are not going out and spending as much. Higher taxes, lower transfer payments, all those kind of things could change the amount of demand that's out there for the market. So, what is macroeconomic equilibrium? It is that price point at which the level of real GDP is consistent with a given price. In other words, when we look at aggregate supply and aggregate demand, that is where they intersect. All right. What determines the point of macroeconomic equilibrium? That is the intersection of aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Okay. It's not all that complicated. It's almost just like what we talked about with supply and demand originally. So, what is one dilemma facing economic policy makers? One of them is how to make real GDP grow without unduly increasing the price level. So we want to grow it, but we don't want to raise prices and thereby causing our rate of inflation to go up. And so that has to be really constantly measured and managed. And that's the reason why a lot of times when we look at really large industries, they do have economists that are working for them. And part of that is to make sure that they can manage the flow of supply and demand in such a way that it's going to keep prices somewhat stable. And that usually makes consumers happy. All right. Thank you so much.